Welcome into a new edition of Going Deep Buffalo. I'm your host, Kevin Massare, here with Kevin Siracuse, breaking down a big 3-0 start for the Bills. Got a special guest, Kevin Oestreicher, from Lockdown Ravens to come on to preview the Ravens game. One of my favorite friends of the show. Had him on every time we play the Ravens. It's a fun show. He's really smart. He knows his stuff. So that'll be a fun one to get into it with him, with the Ravens and what they're doing. And their 1-2 start, even though their metrics look great. So we have a third Kevin coming on. So that'll be fun and confusing all at the same time. But appreciate everybody smash that like button. But this show is brought to you by the Summit Center for some of the best autism care in Western New York. Check out the Summit Center for all that they do for the community.
Tonight's show is also brought to you by Dave Dengler and the Larson-Timko Funeral Home in Fredonia. Larson-Timko Funeral Home offering 100% fully guaranteed price and pre-arranged funeral plans with live streaming available. You can give them a call at 716-679-9000 or visit their website at larsontimkofuneralhome.com.
And there you have it. So we're going to start right at the top. A lot of great game from what I saw, what I heard. It seemed like a very fun game to be at. So I'm glad that everybody got to have a really good opportunity to see the Bills perform. Not only that, see them perform with the Killers as well. We saw that go viral, them jamming out to the Killers in the third quarter. So that's pretty cool. But smash that like button. We got some great Ravens talk coming. But first, I want to spend 20 minutes talking about the Ravens game, Kevin. Or excuse me, about the most recent game, the Jaguars. What is your takeaway from that game? I mean, another blowout. We talked about it on the show. Man coverage. They stayed in trend. Complete mistake. I don't know what show or what statistics they're reading to say that they should stay in man coverage. It's just Josh Allen's historically good against man coverage. It's very well known. It's well known by media members, podcasters. Anybody who knows anything about advanced statistics will tell you that 60% in man was not right. And then the Jags missing most of their DBs. It just didn't amount to everything. As when we talked to our friend of the show last week, Jared, nothing came to fruition for the Jags defense. Their offense got something going on as well. What were your takeaways from the Jags game?
Yeah, we talked about it going up into that game throughout the week, how weak their secondary was to begin with. They were ranked 30th. And then they announced that Darnell Savage Jr. was going to be out. We already knew that Tyson Campbell was out and Andrew Wingard. So they were down 3 DBs, 2 starters, and yet they played, was it 63% man coverage that I heard, or maybe even more? They just refused to get out of it, and Josh Allen tore them apart. I said going into the game that had to be a Josh Allen game. I needed to see them open up the passing game. I love what James Cook's been able to do lately, considering the first 2 weeks. And even Josh Allen with his legs. But I wanted to see Josh Allen's arm, and we saw that in full effect on Monday night.
Now, when you see what Josh Allen was able to do, I mean, he didn't even need a second half. He's getting these games. I mean, the Bills are winning these games without needing second half to football games. They were only allowing, they've only allowed 23 points in the last 10 quarters of football. It's just they're dominating from all stretches around. They're only averaging, and that's a 10-point per game pace that they've allowed over the last 3 weeks, starting after that second half started against the Cardinals. There's just not a lot for Josh Allen to need to do over and above and beyond what he's already able to do in the first half of these games against Miami and against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So at some point, you're going to see him play really well like he did in the second half against the Cardinals. And realistically, the Bills team since then has been on fire, only allowing 10 second half points total in 3 weeks. At some point, those things add up to be really good football, but then they got their first, I guess you want to call it, the first 3 games are supposed to be a test. They're going to get a new test against the Ravens, against a team that is decimated on the offensive line. I'll talk to Kevin about that here momentarily, about what the Ravens injury report looks like. It's not great right now out of there. They have some massive offensive line injuries. You're going to have to mix and match a lot there. They still have the reigning MVP in Lamar Jackson, who can make things happen. They almost came back to beat the Chiefs if it wasn't for a toe out of bounds in week 1. They did blow it in week 2 against the Raiders, but week 3, they almost blew it against the Cowboys, and they very well could have in a game where they were up big in. So they've had a wild 1-2 ride. They stayed out of that vaunted 0-3 record, which is just a death sentence for teams to go 0-3. I think it's only happened once in recent football in the last 25 years. A team has made the playoffs after 0-3. Conversely, though, a cool statistic 80% of the time a team makes it since the recent playoff changes at 3-0. How does that make you feel, Kevin, after the Bills started 3-0?
I feel pretty good. I mean, if you were to say at the beginning of the year that the Bills are going to be 3-0 going into Baltimore, I'm not sure if a lot of Bills fans would have. I mean, we definitely would have taken it, but I don't know if a lot of fans would have agreed with that, because we were saying like, okay, if you can at least be 2-1 going into Baltimore, then you have that tough 3-game road stretch. You might drop one or two of those. People were saying, oh, what if the Bills are 3-3? You still have Kansas City, San Fran, the Rams, and the Lions waiting for you. Well, the Bills are looking like the best team in the NFL. I don't care. I'll say it. Like, not only in the AFC, but in the entire league. And the crazy thing is, they're doing this without the middle of their defense, who are arguably their three top defenders. No Matt Milano, no Terrell Bernard, no Taron Johnson. And I just realized the other day that the Bills are working with over $64 million in dead cap. So not only are they missing two All-Pros and the captain of their defense, they also are working with $64 million in dead cap from all the change and turnover in the offseason, and they're proving all the doubters wrong.
Yeah, they have the second lowest active payroll in the NFL. 25% of their cap is taken up by dead cap. So that essentially, it's different than a team that you can say is overspending, like the New York Yankees or whatever you may look at as you look through other rosters and other teams and other sports. Bills are playing with 25% less than other teams, except the Broncos for getting rid of Russell Wilson. So other than that, they're playing with not a fullback. 25%, that's what Josh Allen does for you to make up for that. So 25%, you're missing your three best. You could argue your three best defenders. You can make that argument that missing those three are your three best defenders on top of 25% of the salary cap. But next year, the Bills have a plethora of picks. They're already starting $11 million to the good. They started $50 million to the poor this year. So it's a $60 million difference from where they started the offseason, plus a bunch of picks as well. So the Bills are in a much different position next year, but playing without 25% of the salary cap is very, very interesting. And they're able to build these rosters with this cheap talent. Look across the roster what the Bills have been able to do. Yes, their tackles have been now paid, but outside of that, there are plenty of players like Ingram, Cam Lewis. You got your linebackers. Your safeties aren't making that much money, truthfully. You're making, just a Christian Benford, best cornerback in the league right now, is making a 6th-round pick salary. So you have these, and Douglas isn't making that much himself. It's just up, and then the receivers, none of them are really getting paid. Curtis Samuel his low usage is still concerning. I didn't love the contract he got. We'll see if he's able to start to produce as needed more in the second half of games, coming off that turf toe, should be healthy. And then you're going to get back, by all accounts, Taron Johnson's really hoping to be back next week against Houston. And it's looking like that timeline that Sean McDermott gave, 2.5 to 4 weeks from the initial injuries for both Bernard and Taron Johnson. That would line them both up around the Houston game next week. So you may get some reinforcements. If not, the Jets game, you get some reinforcements in this tough 3-game stretch, which is, if you look at the schedule now, it is the toughest 3-game stretch. 3 road games against Houston, obviously Baltimore first, then Houston, and then the Jets. I don't think that Rams 49ers stretches and Detroit is as hard as it looked preseason. This is the hard stretch, in my opinion, for the Bills and the Bills roster. And they need to get through it. So I think that getting some reinforcements right in the middle of it will be a really good start, but you did need to start 3-0. I did have them starting 3-0, so it's not a total shock for me. But I also needed to see really getting through the stretch for the Bills, even at 4-0, that puts them in a prime time position to really take command. But the Bills have been good every September and every December, Kevin. It's statistically proven. DVOA says it. Aaron Schatz has said it most recently. He just tweeted today that the Bills are always good to start there. It's always the number 1 rated team through the first 4 weeks. So let's see if the Bills can take that middle stretch that they've historically struggled in from October and November and see if they can correct that. But first comes the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to get Kevin in here in about 15 minutes. But was there anything else you wanted to take away from the Jags game 48 hours ago?
Yeah, I want to talk about Josh Allen for a few minutes, because I think that this is some of the best football we've ever seen from Allen. And because of it, this might be the best football that the Bills are playing in general around him. Like, I think this is just so much fun to watch. And I'm seeing some people in the comments talking about the diva being gone. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with this. So after the game the other night, I was there, and before I drove home, I was like, wait a sec. and I was thinking about some different stats together, and I compiled this tweet, and here it is. Josh Allen threw to 10 different receivers Monday night, completed over 76% of his passes, and still hasn't thrown an interception this year. He has taken the next step in his game, and that should scare the rest of the league. And when I thought about those different stats before I drove home, I was like, holy cow, 10 different receivers. And they weren't just wide receivers. We're talking about running backs, third string running backs with Ty Johnson again. You're using multiple tight ends. And I just think that what they're doing is so much fun to watch. And I think that Josh is feeding off of this new rejuvenated offense, I guess is how I'll say it. And the fact that Joe Brady has been able to reel him in, and we're not seeing sugar high Josh anymore. And he got Allen to understand that you can stretch the field horizontally, and that can lead to more prosperous games vertically. Because before, whether it was Ken Dorsey or even Brian Dable, I feel like Josh Allen had that tendency to always want to stretch it deep. Remember, Dorsey said, let's be smart, not conservative. So that's okay, let's push the ball down the field, but be smart about it. But those were the times that you would see Josh try to fit those balls into tight windows, whether it was his receivers running the wrong routes, maybe Gabe Davis bobbling a pass and it going the other way. There were a lot of turnovers, more than we would have liked. Now, that's not to say that Josh was playing bad, because he was still one of the best quarterbacks. But now that he's been able to mature and take that next step in his game, that's a dangerous combination.
Yeah, look, like at some point he's going to need his receivers to show out for him. He has a plethora of talent on the roster on the offensive side. It is, knock on wood, stayed healthy. The Bills are still going into this week without their 3 defensive starters. But other than that, the team has been very healthy. And then in 2 weeks, the roster could be full from everybody but Milano. And Milano, by all accounts, looks great. I'm thinking he's thinking right around the bye week. So right around December 1st for Milano. So the Bills have some talent. It may be different than years past when the defensive injuries happen at the end of the year or long-term, middle of the year for long-term injuries. Going into the Chiefs game, we talk about it all the time on this show, and I'm sure other shows do too. They just didn't have a playoff defense that could compete against playoff teams. Could that team beat other low-end teams? It did, yes. But when it came to the top-end talent, that defense didn't have it. I think this year the Bills need to stay healthy, but the cornerback play, they didn't have either of these corners in the playoffs. I mean, like, look, what are you supposed to do? That's one of the biggest strengths of this team, of what they've been able to do. They're missing all across the board. The safeties were slow. 2 of them, one of them's on a bad team now. The other one's out of the league. I mean, at some point, the Bills are going to actually catch this on the right path, with their defense actually being healthy one of these years, without a monumental playoff loss against the Chiefs. Some of those things are going to go your way at some point, and no better year than this year for those things to finally happen. You don't know what the Bills are going to do. They have multiple running backs they come at you with. They have 2 tight ends they come at you with. I've already mentioned the receivers. They put them all on display against the Jags. And still, we still have yet to see an MVS day, a Curtis Samuel day. We've still yet to see some of those guys really put up numbers, and we'll see if they do. One thing I want to ask you about real quickly before we go to the Ravens was the Keon Coleman play seemed to beat man coverage fairly easily with a nice drag route for a touchdown. However, he did get benched in the first quarter for being late to a meeting. Is that something that what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's good. Kind of show them the way that they do things here at the NFL level, specifically at One Bills Drive. So as someone who probably experiences that myself from being tardy, I understand from Keon's side, but I understand from Sean McDermott's side too. Like you kind of want to lay the hammer down and say, hey, this is a standard and this is what we're going to expect moving forward. And sometimes that can lead to more prosperous gains, because how many targets did Coleman have?
I think just the one.
Was that his only target?
I believe so, yeah.
Well, maybe this is a moot point, because I was going to say maybe that'll motivate him to push a little bit harder and work to get open a little bit more. But if you only had those 1 or 2 targets at the most, then again, maybe it's a moot point. But ironically enough, he scored his first touchdown. So maybe there was a little bit of juice for him to say like, hey, coach, I still got it. Don't worry. I got you. But all in all, I think everything worked out great, because one thing that I'll say real quick, this is so much fun. It's not it is stress-free. It's not stressful anymore. I'm used to my heart racing and the blood pressure boiling, but this is like 8 straight dominant quarters of football going back to Thursday night and then having that long mini bye into Monday night. It's weird, but it's cool. Like this is a lot of fun, and everyone's clicking on all cylinders: offense, defense, even special teams.
Yeah, and I think what you can take away from what the Bills have been able to do is they did what they needed to do against these three teams. Going in 2-1 wasn't going to be acceptable. I mean, the Dolphins are like one of the worst teams in the league. The division is definitely weaker than I thought, than most of analysts thought. It is a weak division. New England does not look competitive. That offensive line is terrible. They just aren't going to have it this year, in my opinion. They're facing too many injuries themselves. The Dolphins, I don't know what's going on with the Dolphins. We'll see if they are able to rebound or if this is it for Mike McDaniel or if he gets a pass because the Tua concussions, if Tua comes back in 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it'd have to be at least 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. What happens there? The division is the Bills versus the Jets, and that's about it. And that's why I think the Bills are really pushing to be playing at all cylinders in 2 weeks at, in MetLife, a place that they don't historically play well lately. They played well there in the future or in the past. They haven't played well there lately. So the Bills definitely can set themselves up with the early lead in this stretch of 3 games if they can get through it. And then McDermott seems to be pushing back to have his roster ready for this Houston game. May mean more to him than Houston's this upstart team. Everyone's talking about them. They just lost. They were just manhandled in their game. Really nice looking performance there by the Vikings defense and what they were able to do. With CJ Stroud, it looked like a game plan that others will start to copy with what Brian Flores was able to do against CJ Stroud and Stephon Diggs. That'll be a big game next week. But first, we have a Sunday night football game against the Ravens. That's, the Ravens have had their struggles, not the way I expected them to start. I thought this may be a start of 3-0 teams, at least 2-1 teams, 2-1, 3-0. But they have dropped a couple to the Raiders and then almost dropped it to the Cowboys. So that was a pretty disappointing start if you're a Ravens fan. We'll get Kevin's take in here and momentarily on his opinion on what's going on. And we always ask our guests what's going on in Baltimore to start with. We want to kind of get up to speed on what's happened in the first 3 weeks. And there's some narrative out there that they're getting really crushed by the referees. Apparently, Baltimore is 32nd in penalties in terms of the differential. There's been some really weird circumstances out of there with refs not granting a safety. I mean, I don't know what's going on, but apparently they have some legitimate gripes out of Baltimore when it comes to officiating. They like to say winners get championships, losers complain about the refs. But at some point, there is some validity to, if you're not getting the calls, these games are so razor thin that, it does affect your performance on the field, whether you want to be admitted or not. So what are you looking forward to most as this Ravens team? The Bills go to Baltimore where they've historically played fairly well. They've played Lamar Jackson fairly well as himself, and Taron Johnson's been a big part of shutting down Lamar Jackson. They don't have him, but they are ticking on all cylinders. What are your immediate reactions to having to face Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson, and Derrick Henry?
I think I'm looking forward to seeing this offense again because we've seen it defensively and we've seen it offensively, but I feel like we kind of know what a McDermott defense looks like because it's kind of just plug and play, next man up. And that was what we got in Miami. And not that it lost its luster, but I feel like we're on such a high right now with that offense where like you just want more, where it's like, oh, maybe we can get MVS involved. Maybe we can get Curtis Samuel more involved. Maybe we can get Dawson Knox going. So as much as I want to see this defensive attack on Lamar Jackson, I think I'm looking forward to the offense a little bit more just because they kind of left me with the cliffhanger. Like I walked out of the stadium feeling so good as I was like, okay, now how do we follow this up? What can we do next week to impress the national media, the national audience on Sunday Night Football?
Yeah, I mean, that's the next impression. I mean, if they do that, I mean, there's a lot of metrics that say that Ravens are still very much top 5 and a lot of different things, especially advanced analytics. We can get into some of those with Kevin. I'm sure he'll be able to share some with us from his end. But there's still a lot of good metrics around the Ravens and what they're able to do and what they're historically always able to do. It's always a good team. They're kind of like the Bill. I mean, they're following like in the Bills' same guise of divisional round, conference championship, getting an injury to Lamar Jackson a couple of years ago in the playoffs. Should have beat the Browns as well, but should have beat the Bengals, but had that fumble by Scoop Huntley, who tried to go over the top. So they've had some playoff successes and failures themselves. Last year, they played really well against Mahomes, but their offense didn't really show. Conversely to the Bills, their offense showed up and their defense did not no-showed against the Chiefs. So there's some definite correlations to one of us trying to take down the Chiefs. The Bills are obviously in that 3-0 start, the Ravens in that 1-2 start. It's a tough thing to climb out of, but it looks like the Ravens, I don't think their division's very good either. I think the Broncos, or excuse me, I think the Browns aren't good. I think the Bengals stink. I think the Steelers are fool's gold. I mean, they're 3-0, but they're going to end up a wild card team again.
They're going to get their 10 wins. You know that.
9 to 10. Yeah, absolutely. I think
maybe
that's going to fall into maybe. I just don't buy Fields in that offense. That offense has been bad, in my opinion. I think the Ravens will catch them. There's not a lot in this, especially with Miami down, Jacksonville down. The Colts don't look great. The Browns don't look great. The Bengals don't look great. The Steelers should be fairly fine for a playoff spot. The Dolphins don't look great, but I don't think that they're going to do much more than a wild card through this experience. But I could be wrong. They could be competitive with the Ravens all the way to the end of the season. Remains to be seen, especially if the Bills go in and beat the Ravens, push them to 1-3. The Steelers are able to win again and go to 4-0, 3-game lead. We've seen the Dolphins blow it. That's a lot. That's a pretty big game lead. I know it's pretty early, but I still give this division to the Ravens. I still think it's Baltimore and Buffalo versus the Chiefs to take them down, and then Houston sitting in there as well to see if they can come through. But I don't buy any wild card teams yet this year, and the Jets are going to be there. Their Steelers are going to be there. I don't even have a 7th right now that I see it could be anybody that I see come and take that 7th wild card spot, but that's where I stand in the AFC. But Bills versus Ravens, I mean, 1 versus 3, 2 versus 3, 2 versus 4. Is that how you feel, Kevin? Like it is at least 2 of the top 4, right?
You mean like right now or come January?
In general, I don't mean this second. I mean in general, most likely at the end of the year.
I think the Bills can definitely be in the top 3 based on how they're playing.
Okay.
Like, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that the Bills are going to get the 1 seed because I'm still not sure if they can do that. As confident as I am, I just need to see a little bit more. Okay. But yeah, I think they could be the 2 or 3 seed, and then Baltimore. Yeah, if they win the division, I don't know. That's tough because Pittsburgh could really do it if Baltimore crumbles. Like they could go to 1-3, and you're looking at a lot of turmoil in Maryland. You know, so this is a huge game for them where it could really cause some big swings. So I don't know if I could say that the Ravens are going to be one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the AFC when it's all said and done. Like they really might have to sneak into that wild card.
At least 5 then, right? How low are you going to put them? 5?
I don't know. I haven't even thought about the seedings yet.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm just curious. I'm not necessarily even seedings. Just what do you think they're the 5th best team in the AFC? The seedings don't really matter. It's irrelevant.
Yeah. If we're to do like power rankings, like they're definitely still top 5. I don't even know about that right now.
Okay. Wow.
I guess like they're probably around 5th.
So you're down on them as a team. You're down on the Raiders. Is it the injuries, just how they've played? What specifically about Baltimore has gotten you to not put them in the top 3?
I think it's just how they played. And I mean, they almost blew it against Dallas. They're up 28-6, and they almost blew that too. So they really could be 0-3 right now, staring at 0-4 in the face. So I just have a hard time saying like, oh, this team could be good, so I'm going to make them the 3rd best team based on my projections. I'm kind of more that eye test guy. I don't know. That'd be a cool exercise to do. Like if we had enough time at the end of this show or even in future shows to kind of come up with an AFC power rankings each week.
It's a good bye week episode for sure. But the Bills have a bye pretty late on it. But maybe worth it at that point. We'll have more data. More eye test, more data, more advanced analytics. So it could definitely be a good eye test. Mark Andrews isn't playing well. That's true. They're not saying what's going on with Mark Andrews. He looks horrible. The offensive line looks bad. The defense isn't as good as it normally is. So there's definitely some limitations. Lamar Jackson's still Lamar Jackson. Just like when the Bills are down or having a down start or a down stretch or a down middle of the year, you still can always default to having Josh Allen. And you can say who's better. Like a lot of people would agree Josh Allen's better now, but there's been stretches where Lamar Jackson has shown dominance in his own right. They still have one of those guys, in my opinion, that can win you any single week, regardless of who's on the roster. So that's kind of where I leave it when it comes to Baltimore.
Before we get Kevin on, I just want to ask you, because now I'm thinking about this. So would you agree that the top 3 teams right now are Buffalo, Kansas City, and Houston in the AFC?
Probably, but I don't know how much I buy Houston. I don't know how much I buy Houston.
I have Houston above Baltimore for sure. And right now, because they're 3-0, I have Pittsburgh above Baltimore. And then, like, based on the standings, you could make a case that the Chargers are better than the Ravens, but I think the Ravens will still be better than the Chargers. Yeah. So that's why it gets a little convoluted. So I guess if I had to answer that, you got me thinking now. I'm thinking that the Ravens are probably within that 4 to 5, maybe 6 range, but most likely you could slot them in at 4 or 5.
No, I mean, I got them as hard 3. Like that's where I got them. I thought, I mean, they played seriously. I thought they were just as good as the Chiefs. We'll see where they match up with the Bills. I mean, I know what happened against the Raiders and the Cowboys, but I mean, Cowboys are still a decent football team. Like, that's a good football team. That's not like they were playing the Jags. So ultimately, we'll see how they finish. They always are another team that's like the Bills. Like, they go through these stretches, but you can always rely on them at the end of the year to be at the top or toward the top. I just think having one of those dudes is super helpful to the way you see it and the way you rank out in these scenarios. And I still am not going to buy Houston yet. I don't care who they added in the entire offseason. They got manhandled by the Vikings. And if more defenses show that, they're going to, yes, they have the division, but they're going to be sitting in that 4 seed probably the entire year. But it's time to welcome in our guest, Kevin, one of my favorite guests, does amazing work over at Locked On Ravens Wire. I always follow his stuff, even when the Bills have nothing to do with the Ravens. I'm always checking in to see what kind of content he's creating as the AFC North is right there with the AFC East. And it's always interesting. There's always something going on in Cleveland, or there's always Cincinnati to worry about. So I'm always interested to hear what's going on. And you got great coverage, man. How's it going, Kevin?
Yeah, bro, I appreciate that, man. I'm glad to be here. And, I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little concerned for HBO and that in-season Hard Knocks with the way this division has started out so far. We got Pittsburgh with Justin Fields at 3-0, Baltimore and Cleveland at 1-2. And then, man, that Cincinnati Bengals team can never start fast. So, I'm looking forward to this game, though. I think, again, 2 of the top teams in the AFC. Baltimore, certainly their record won't necessarily show that, but I think they're going through a lot of growing pains right now. But all the credit in the world to Buffalo, man. They are steamrolling.
I'm getting called a Ravens stan, Kevin.
Hey, come on over, man. Come on over.
I just believe I just like the Chiefs. Like, I'll never believe the Chiefs are lower than 2 or 3. Like, I'll just never do it. Like, especially as long as they have Mahomes. I don't care. They went through this stretch last year where they're losing to the Raiders. They lost on a offensive offside against the Bills. Like, at some point, I don't really care. Like, I want to see in this late December, we can talk. We can say they're struggling, but the Chiefs did. Like, they went into the playoffs, in my opinion. They got a bad Dolphins team in the playoffs, a team that was totally cooked. Before coming to Buffalo, a defense that was totally cooked, before playing the Ravens, and they weren't able to move the ball on Baltimore, in my opinion. Just neither could Baltimore. And so it led to them winning the Super Bowl. But give us a recap of the first 3 weeks. We have a lot of viewers that are like, there's some good advanced analytics in Baltimore right now. Like, there's definitely some good numbers. People are confused. What's going on with the O-line? Get us up to speed in these. Why did you lose to the Raiders? Get us up to speed in these 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, it's been a whirlwind. Even dating back to the offseason, right after that AFC Championship game, they lost Mike McDonald within days, and now he's 3-0 in Seattle, and everybody in Baltimore is freaking out about how they should have kept McDonald and either had that promotion to Harbaugh in the front office or something along those lines. But week 1 was crazy. I mean, Chiefs got out to a fast start. Baltimore ended up coming back in that game and kept just the right amount of distance to stay in it. And then Isaiah Likely's toe, Kevin Durant style, hit that line. And, they don't get the job done in that game. But I think a lot of people in Baltimore thought, okay, you know what? You don't love to lose, obviously. You hate to lose. But there were a lot of things you can take away that were positives in that game. Hanging with the Chiefs, a lot of good things. Week 2 comes around, and they're up on the Raiders. Things are looking fine and dandy in that fourth quarter. And then, as the Ravens have done, even you can go back to the last time Baltimore and Buffalo played, right? Buffalo came back on Baltimore in that game. And the Raiders end up just beating Baltimore in that fourth quarter, and a lot was made about it because that was not just a one-off. This has been a thing. The Ravens have blown the most 10-plus point fourth quarter leads in the last 5 years. The Raiders hadn't won a game when they were down 10 in the fourth quarter. Their last 49, I guess number 50 against Baltimore was just the lucky charm for them. And so you head into week 3, you're 0-2. We know the stats about 0-3 teams not making the playoffs and how rare it is. And they steamrolled Dallas for 3 quarters. Dallas's run defense is atrocious, and the Ravens did what they were supposed to do. They ran the ball. Derrick Henry got going. He finished the game with over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. But then the Ravens, as they do, they got conservative. They said, let's just get out of here with a win. Let's just play it safe. And they probably said we're up by enough where, nothing crazy is going to happen, right? And then Justin Tucker misses from inside 50, which, again, it's been a whirlwind for Justin Tucker this year. He ranks dead last in the league among qualifying kickers and field goal percentage. And then you have Dallas going down the field in like 2 minutes, 10 plays, score a touchdown. Zay Flowers has an onside kick, go through his hands, and Dallas gets the ball again. And then they go down the field again in 2 minutes to score a touchdown. The Ravens go 3 and out. Dallas goes down the field again, 10 plays, 2 minutes, scores a touchdown. And you're just thinking, are we seriously about to go through this again? And if Lamar and Zay don't hit on that third down play, man, the way Brandon Aubrey was kicking that ball, he was going to be good from 80 or something, like to send that game to overtime.
It was going to overtime, yeah.
Yeah, he's incredible, man. But they get the job done. So it's been crazy because the Ravens are dealing with a lot of change, as I mentioned. 3 new starters on the offensive line, as you talked about there, Kevin, and new defensive coordinator in Zach Orr, who prior to the season had never called plays before at any level of football. Obviously played for 3 years with the Ravens, but it's a different ball game, play calling versus being out there, although your play calling, is aided by some of your playing experience if you're Zach Orr. So in this division, again, I think it's still early enough in the season where you're not crowning the Steelers right now. The Ravens still have some time to claw back into it, but this is going to be a really good test for the Ravens, especially considering they only threw the ball 15 times, only had 3 straight dropbacks in that week 3 game. And obviously, I'd say Buffalo's defensive front is just a little more competent than Dallas is. And so I think it's going to be a much better game, at least in terms of that.
Kevin, I got to ask you, because before you came on, Kevin got me thinking about the AFC power rankings, whether it's right now or towards the end of the year. And I hadn't really thought about putting a number on it, but I think I settled on 5 or 6 because right now I would have Buffalo, Kansas City, Houston. And I think you got to put the Steelers ahead of the Ravens right now because they're 3-0 and the Ravens are only 1-2. And I mean, they almost blew it against Dallas. So they could really be 0-3 staring at 0-4 based on Sunday Night Football. So I have Pittsburgh as number 4. And then I think here's where you could slot them in at number 5 because I don't know if I really believe in the Chargers. We'll see about that. I mean, maybe they continue to win with Harbaugh and Justin Herbert if he's healthy, but I don't know. So I feel like you could put Baltimore in based on what you think is going to happen towards the end of the year. But would you agree? Are they within that 5 to 6 range? Because Kevin said they could be top 3.
I'd probably put them 4 right now. I probably agree with your assessment of Buffalo, Kansas City, and then even though Houston looked bad on Sunday against Minnesota, I still would probably put them up there based off what we've seen. But I still think that, to your point, when it's all said and done, when we're talking about this in December or January as the playoffs start up, I would probably say Baltimore is back in that top 3. I'd probably say it ends in no order in particular, but any 3: Kansas City, Baltimore, Buffalo, Kansas City, Baltimore, however you want to rank them. Those are going to be probably the 3 teams I would say are the top of the AFC. Pittsburgh always finds a way. I mean, I think at this point you have to tip your hat to Mike Tomlin. And he does his little magic trick every single year in that Pittsburgh team. Although, to be fair to Pittsburgh, they just needed a quarterback that wasn't Kenny Pickett to go out there and do so. I mean, they needed just someone who was competent enough to not lose them games. And Justin Fields is doing that for them right now. And so with that defense, you can just kind of ride that wave. And if Justin does just enough, well, you're in pretty good shape to win those games. But I do think that with what we saw in week 3 with the rushing offense, because essentially what it comes down to with Baltimore is it's just the fourth quarter. If football is 48 minutes, they'd be 3-0 and probably the best team in the league, or at least up there with one of them. But there's a 60-minute game. You play 4 quarters. And I think that a lot of people treated the win like a loss because of the fact that they almost blew the game. But with what we saw out of the run game, out of the run defense as well, Baltimore's run defense has been exceptional this season. I'll put them at 4 because obviously you got to give Buffalo their flowers. Kansas City is the defending champs and they're 3-0, even though they're not playing like we've seen from Kansas City, although last year wasn't great either. So I guess, past 2 seasons for Kansas City hasn't been wonderful. And then for Houston, they're a talented football team. And I think that we're looking at those 4 as division winners between Baltimore, Buffalo, Kansas City, and Houston. But there are a lot of teams that are going to sneak up into that conversation. And Pittsburgh, obviously being 3-0, has to be one of them.
I mean, I guess you could put the Jets and say, like, do you think the Jets could be better than the Ravens? I guess I should have mentioned them, but I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Kevin has them 3, you have them 4, I have them 5. So, give or take, I think that's a pretty rounded answer for the 3 of us. 3 Kevins, by the way. We got to get used to
Yeah,
that.
I love this. Look at this.
Yeah, it's a good day for Kevin's. But yeah, average of 4, so I guess it makes sense. I mean, I ultimately having them in the 3 seed. That's where I have Baltimore. We'll see if that ends up checking out or if Pittsburgh makes me look silly. But I just don't buy them. I don't buy them at the end of the year if they have any type of defensive injuries. I know defense does travel. But at some point, offenses are going to win. I just think Baltimore will beat Pittsburgh. But I mean, I could be wrong. We'll see what happens. That's going to be your guys' problem to worry about. The Bills have to worry about the Jets. Luckily, the Patriots and the Dolphins aren't very good. Somehow, I don't know. Dolphins are supposed to be a top 4 team as well.
Yeah.
So that probe. I mean, the Bills always expose them. That's how I feel. Like ultimately, that's how I always feel about the Ravens. I think they're going to come through. Their DVOA's 5th. I buy the numbers a little bit too heavy. At some point, there's a little bit more that goes into it. But they're playing 5th level football right now. I don't buy New Orleans as the 2nd best team in football. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that ultimately over the long course, Baltimore will end up leveling out. You'll find your offensive line talent. But I saw them all on the injury report. That's worrisome. Bills aside, that's weird.
Yeah, I don't think anybody was expecting it because no one really came out of the game with any lumps, it seemed like. And again, guys, this is football. Guys get banged up. Guys go through things. Nobody's healthy by the end of the season. Nobody's really healthy now, for being honest, in terms of just all the hits that people are taking. But they can't afford to really have anybody miss games right now because the offensive line, as it stands, is already such a big question mark. Now, to their credit, they improved drastically from what we saw in both week 1 and week 2. I mean, it was night and day. Now, part of that is the fact that, again, Baltimore only threw the ball 15 times and had 3 dropbacks. So it's, not like there was a ton to go off of. But again, you got to worry about a rejuvenated Von Miller and, guys like Ed Oliver in the interior and all of the other players that Buffalo has in that front 7 that can wreak havoc. And for Baltimore, Linderbaum, we know that he's one of the best centers in this league. There's no worries about him, although he did pop up on the injury report. Ronnie Stanley has found his form. He's had a really tough road to get back from his injuries, but he looks like maybe not the prime all-pro Ronnie Stanley, but pretty far up there. But then it's the other guys. We lose Kevin Zeitler, who's balling out in Detroit right now. Morgan Moses is going to miss some time with the Jets, but he's a vet that they trusted. And John Simpson actually is having another solid start to the season with the Jets as well. And so it's guys like Daniel Falele, who the Ravens are essentially experimenting with at guard in a year where you're competing for a Super Bowl, which, personally, I don't necessarily agree with that decision. And while he looked better in week 3, it's just a fact of game flow where they were getting to the second level better on their runs, where that was an issue for them in the first couple weeks. They were springing Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson free a bit better. Falele was identifying stunts more. He was shifting over, picking up. He was getting out into space more. But now you hear even he has a hip issue. And while he was practicing, that still is like, oh, well, how big of an issue is that for him? Is it going to limit any of his mobility? In this Ravens offense, you have to be able to go out there and just run the ball effectively and get to your spots. And so some of these offensive linemen have that skill set. Others don't. But, if any of these injuries limit them in any way, I mean, you can't really afford any margin for error against this Buffalo D-line.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of just out of your own fan base / media members complaining about the right side of the line. Is that warranted with Makari and Falele? Is that ultimately an issue? Because I've seen a lot of people like bench those guys, I've seen a lot bring in Cleveland. Is that a thing? Is that a real theory?
Yeah, it is. It definitely is, because I think for all of the potential that a guy like Daniel Falele has, he's a massive guy, and him in the middle of that offensive line is almost like, if it all works out, it's a mismatch nightmare. But the fact of the matter is he's still very raw. And Ben Cleveland, while he's not this all-pro savior, it's kind of like what I was talking about with the Steelers quarterback situation. It's Daniel Falele was a key contributor in both those losses to the Chiefs and to the Raiders. Whereas if Ben Cleveland can come in there and just give you competent guard play and not be a contributor to the loss, but not necessarily do stuff to win the game, they just need somebody who's not going to be a liability. And so Lele was a lot better in week 3. And I'll give him all the credit in the world for that. But it's a matter of consistency. So if we kind of go back to that same thing in week 4 where it's like, oh, they're all of a sudden struggling again and Buffalo's D-line is feasting and, it's all on the right side. We saw the Ravens help out that right side a bunch. They first all ran to the left a bunch in that Dallas game in week 3. They're also using imbalanced lines a lot, putting Ronnie Stanley on the right side of the line and running that way. So I don't think they fully trust their guys there, but this was kind of the position that they got themselves in. It's very hard to rebuild an offensive line in season because everybody needs offensive linemen. Right. You're not going to find good offensive linemen on the trade market or just getting cut left and right because, you might need a quality guy, but guess what? So do the other 31 teams. So that's why you have to get your plan in the offseason, put it together and roll with it there. Now they're kind of stuck with what they have. And I think that it will get better, but it's still going to be some level of an issue throughout the entire season. Just how big of an issue is going to be the big question.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, it's going to be an interesting development to watch how their offensive line develops over the course of, I guess, the season. But the Bills have had a horde. They have a young slew of the Bills' offensive line has been ranked fairly high so far this season. Got some people calling it the number 1 offensive line. They played really well. So the Bills have hoarded they won't expose them to waivers at all. They don't trust them, make them to the practice squad. So they've had to hoard their young talent. So it's going to be an interesting perspective. Like the Bills did have some positions to trade from in the offensive line. It was interesting that they didn't actually. They hoarded them, to your point. There's probably a reason why that they liked some of their young backups that they've drafted behind their starting unit. But, get me up to speed on the Ravens offense in general. Enough about the O-line. We'll see how that develops over the course of the week. Lamar Jackson. I still have him in the top 3 quarterbacks. I get clowned sometimes. I would pick him over Burrow. I don't know if it's a hot take, good take, bad take. I don't know. I just think that he can win you football games when you need it. I'd like to see him do it more in the playoffs. I'm sure Ravens fans would too. Josh is getting labeled at that too. Like, although Josh is really, really, really good in the playoffs, you got to do it. You got to at some point beat the Chiefs or beat somebody good. The Bills have beaten everybody they wanted in the playoffs, and including a Ravens team at one point, but just not. They don't get that Mahomes or Burrow win. Those are the 2 bugaboos the Bills have on their side. They struggle against both of those. So how is Lamar looking so far in the season? His numbers look good. His advanced analytics look good. Like I said, the DVOA is there. So a lot of those boxes are checked off for Baltimore. Looks like where's their offense? It looks like 9th DVOA right now. Is that or 2nd? Excuse me. Is that? I mean, so something's working. Is it the run game? What's Lamar looking at? I haven't seen production from Mark Andrews. I like Zay Flowers. Bills fans wanted Zay Flowers in the draft. So bring me up to speed.
Yeah, it's been a solid unit so far. And part of that is because of the run game. I mean, it has to be. Derrick Henry, there were a little bit of blips in how they used him early in the season. He had 5 carries on that first opening drive against Kansas City, and then really they didn't use him a bunch in that game. But they're utilizing him better over these last couple of weeks, including getting him involved in the screen game and just in the short passing game in general, which he can be a really effective player while doing that. But the big thing with this Baltimore offense is while their passing numbers look good, I would love to see them stretch the ball vertically. While again, maybe Buffalo's not the best team to do that against because they say, no way, you're not doing that against us. That's Buffalo's MO on defense, or at least one of them. But we see that, the Ravens, for example, against Dallas averaged 12.1 yards per pass on 15 passes. But then you see it was Nelson Aguilar catching a ball for 8 yards and running for 50, or Derrick Henry catching a ball at the line of scrimmage and running for 23, or Charlie Kohler catching the ball 5 yards out and running for 25 more. So they haven't necessarily pushed the ball down the field. They're using their heavy personnel. The thing that I would love to see as well is them continuing to work play action, zone reads, options, whatever it may be with Derrick Henry and Lamar, because we've seen multiple times this season where defenses just freeze. They freeze because if they can establish the ground game early, which they've done, what it does is it makes these opponents stack the box more, respect that run game more. And then with that, with guys like Andrews, even though you did mention it, Andrews not a strong start to the season. Isaiah likely had that great week 1, but pretty lackluster weeks 2 and 3. With those heavy sets in there, you can have free releases over the middle of the field. You can have receivers locked up one-on-one in those modes because you're sneaking up you're creeping up towards the line if you're a defense and that run game's working for you. And then if you run play action off of that, it should give you easy opportunities over the middle of the field. So Baltimore's been relying on the short and intermediate passing game, most definitely. Lamar's been taking what's in front of him, which I think is something that everybody here in Baltimore wanted to see him do more of this season. So that's a good step in the right direction. His usage on the ground has been interesting. 16 carries in week 1, 14 in week 3. Didn't really have a ton in week 2. Feels like that's going to be a big part, especially if they are trying to win the game early, getting him going on the ground, forcing defenses to make choices. That's going to be big for this Ravens team moving forward. But overall, I would say they're doing fine so far. I mean, Dallas, they absolutely just crushed them. And even against Las Vegas, they get out to an early start. So it's just a matter of continuing that consistency. It's year 2 under Todd Monken, so the expectations are higher as opposed to year 1. But I think part of it also is them just getting acclimated with their offensive line, because that has been the group that has struggled the most this season.
Kevin, I have 2 questions. So first of all, can you pinpoint why Mark Andrews has had such a slow start to the season? And then number 2, do you think that the Ravens have done enough to surround Lamar Jackson with talent on the outside? Because I know that was a big talking point last year. You guys got Odell. That kind of worked, right? Like, he was okay.
Yeah, it was something where the Ravens, it almost, with Lamar's whole contract situation and some of the stuff that we had heard from him and the rumors, he needed somebody on the outside, and he wanted. So essentially what he said was, hey, I'd love to play with DeAndre Hopkins. I'd love to play with Odell Beckham Jr. Those are 2 guys that, if you could get me one of them, I'd love. They went and they chose Odell. And Odell was great from a leadership perspective. I mean, again, the contract he got was always an overpay. They paid him $18 million for a season. But again, if you want to be a receiver in this Baltimore offense, it's a little bit different than in most other offenses in the league. John Harbaugh has said it multiple times. It takes a specific type of wide receiver to want to come play in this Baltimore offense, because you're not going to get 10 targets a game. You're not going to get 1,000 yards. You're not guaranteed that, not guaranteed 10 touchdowns. The passing offense, despite it shifting more towards wide receivers, will always run through the tight ends. At least that's the most effective thing that they've been able to do with Lamar. So you had that 3-receiver set of Zay, Rashad, and Odell last season. They let Odell walk. They re-signed Nelson Aguilar. Didn't really do a ton to address the position. And part of that is because they have trust in their tight ends, like a Mark Andrews.
I'll say you got Deontay Hardy from Buffalo.
That is true. Although he hasn't necessarily played. He's been the return guy. Hasn't necessarily played a role on offense for him this season. But I think as the season goes on, we could see Deontay Hardy making it back. He's a local guy too. So it's kind of a feel-good story coming home to Maryland and having that story behind him. But with the trust in Mark Andrews, and kind of your question about why it's been a slow start for him, he was coming off the injury last season, played in the AFC Championship game, but obviously wasn't fully 100% in that game. I just think that they're a lot more confident in their rotation this year. It has been a bit shocking, though, how little he's been used in certain areas, especially last week. He was last on the tight end squad in snaps. Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kohler both out-snapped him. Week 3 was definitely game flow. I mean, to Andrews and his credit, he had the highest, and depending on, how much you don't like PFF in their grading system, he ranked out as the highest blocking grade of his career. It was the best blocking game he's ever had, according to PFF. So they're using him in certain situations, but it is a little concerning because I think with Mark, there have always been questions about value with tight end contracts. And I think his value has been pretty fair over the course of his deal. Baltimore can save $11 million from cutting him next season. There would be probably 25 teams lining up out the door to go sign Mark Andrews if he ends up getting cut. So I'm not necessarily on that train until we get more of a sample size on that. But he doesn't have to have as big of a burden on his plate this season, where it's always kind of been in this Lamar Jackson-led offense, Mark Andrews save us. 10 targets to Mark Andrews, force feed Mark Andrews. John Harbaugh's made it very clear this season that they're going to spread the ball out more. And with that comes less targets for Mark Andrews and less targets for everybody who was in that, Lamar's exclusive club of elite targets, which is usually only Mark Andrews and one other receiver, that being Zay Flowers this time around. But I think that if they wanted to go out there and make a move for somebody, like a wide receiver, I've always been on the Courtland Sutton train for this team. He's not your expensive type guy where, when Lamar's on a rookie contract, I would have loved for them to go out and get a guy like that, like how Buffalo went out there and got Stephon Diggs for Josh Allen and did that on his deal. But again, when you sign these quarterbacks to big contracts, it's harder and harder to do that, especially when Baltimore in particular invests so much on the defensive side of the ball. Sutton, I believe, is making $14-ish million over the next 2 seasons per year. I think it'd be manageable with their cap situation. They need a big body receiver anyway. I just don't know if Denver wants to move him. And that's the biggest part of this whole conversation. If it takes two to tango, I'm sure that there would be some team willing to give the Ravens some level of receiver. But if it's not a needle mover, if I'm Baltimore, I don't necessarily need to move off of my draft picks. But I will say Baltimore's getting 4 comp picks this year. So if there was a time to make a deal, especially if they have enough trust in this unit and this team to go make a run, I mean, I'd go out there and do it.
As you were talking, I'm kind of thinking about this from a Bills perspective and how both of these teams are kind of similar because we have the 2 tight ends, right? Like you guys have Likely and Andrews. We have Kincaid and Knox. You have a strong running game led by Derrick Henry. The Bills have James Cook. And it's kind of been insert your name here in the wide receiver room. And you're just kind of piecing it together. And I really like what the Bills have done because Josh Allen's been playing so well. So I'm confident in the Bills offense. I guess just to wrap up this part of our segment here, are you confident in this Ravens offense moving forward? And as they get into January, if they do make the playoffs, do you think they can take that next step and have enough to surpass the Chiefs or even the Bills?
I think it all starts up front. I think their skill position, I'm confident enough. I still wish they would have more in the wide receiver room, just essentially because, look, Rashad Bateman is a heck of a route runner, and we know that when he gets opportunities, he can produce. But he and Lamar are still establishing that chemistry, and they're trusting him as their wide receiver too. So Andrews, I still feel confident in, even though he has the slow start. Zay Flowers, I feel confident in. Isaiah Likely, I feel confident in. But I think it's going to depend on this offensive line. I mean, you guys have mentioned how solid Buffalo's line has been this year and the fact that they have a lot of guys up front that can make an impact. Whereas for the Ravens, we're kind of in wait and see mode about like, okay, is this a trend that they're going to struggle all season this badly? Are they going to improve in some way, shape, or form? Are guys going to step up? What do these systems look like? Can they mask enough of their issues? So I think when it comes to January and you're going up against, again, it's kind of like what we've seen for the Ravens this year. There's been no let up. You go up against Chris Jones and that Chiefs team in week 1, Max Crosby in week 2, Micah Parsons in week 3, Von Miller and company in week 4. This offensive line, I think, is going to dictate a lot of the Ravens' success this year because Lamar, we know more often than not, just like Josh Allen would do, right? These elite quarterbacks can put on that Superman cape and they can do it all for their team and they can make sure that they can will their team to a victory. But man, if that offensive line isn't blocking effectively, it makes it so much harder and nobody can do it entirely by themselves, especially when there are 3 guys chasing you in the backfield every play. And if you're Derrick Henry, it's the same thing where he can stiff arm you to oblivion, much like Josh Norman knows down there in Buffalo. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, there are 2 people on him in the offensive backfield. He's not going to go very far. So the skill position players, I'm confident enough in. The offensive line, I think the jury's still out for me on that one.
Yeah, certainly. And you look through their schedule, like obviously that is tough start. Chiefs, Cowboys, Bills in there. They came, then you're going to get the Bengals. Consider them what you want. Still always going to be a tough division game as they're trying to figure out post Callahan what's going on there. Offense looks okay. That defense looks like it's a mess. But then Commanders and I mean, gosh, that's a tough start. I mean, for what they're doing. Then you got the Bucks, another team that's overperforming. Then maybe you get a little bit of relief with the Browns, Broncos. And you got the Steelers, Chargers. I mean, it's not a gimme schedule at all for the Ray. I thought I was going to look through there and see lots of W's. And I still do. I still see plenty of W's in there. But, I mean, that Bills, Bengals, Commanders, Bucks, Browns, you got Bengals and Steelers in there, Chargers, Eagles. Like, I mean, that's a mini little gauntlet. I mean, that's tough. Like, is there a little concern with the way that's playing out? Because I would have thought the Commanders and Bucks are gimme wins for the Ravens, but those have turned into I still would think the Ravens will win those, but those turn to a lot harder football games. So you got a tough middle of the season, but then after that Eagles, but then you got the Steelers, Giants, Texans, Browns. There's going to be some problems there. I still think they come out of it, but it's challenging than it looked for me a couple weeks ago. Yeah,
and I think this it's exactly what it is when you play a first place schedule, and the Ravens obviously being as good as they were last season. It was always going to be something like this. But you're right, where teams like the Bucks, who are playing really good football this season, obviously not so much in that Denver game, but still really good football. Then you have guys like the Commanders on that team who are there. They're a scrappy team. And then the divisional games are always, you just never know in this AFC North. I know in the AFC East is kind of the same way where, you have those teams where you usually dominate them, but then there's one game where it's like, oh, okay, that's different. The divisional games always get weird. In the AFC North, the one team that has had Lamar Jackson's number over the course of his career
Browns.
consistently has been the Steelers.
Steelers, yeah.
It's been the Steelers, where surprisingly enough, Lamar is practically, he owns the state of Ohio, just because the Browns and the Bengals have been the two teams where he has just dominated against.
I know he dominates the Bengals, yeah.
Yeah, Mark Andrews, honestly, he also loves playing in the Ohio because he loves playing the Bengals and the Browns. He and Lamar have a connection during those games, but the Steelers have been that team that he has just not been able to figure out. So I see that. Look, in my opinion, I still think Baltimore has the best shot to come out of the AFC North. Got to, pay respect to Pittsburgh and say, look, they've done their job over these first 3 weeks, and it's not like they're playing awful, terrible teams. I mean, the Chargers, again, that was a 2-0 team coming into that game, and even though they're kind of banged up, still, Justin Fields is doing enough. But in my opinion, you have to be able to win, even if your start to the year is not great. You do have that little stretch in the middle where it is Browns and Broncos, and depending on what happens with the Bengals season, that could get interesting. And then you have the Giants in there. This Ravens team, they love to play up and down the competition. They love to look incredible against teams that they might be, it's like, oh, this is going to be a tough game, 2 top teams, and then Baltimore goes out there and just blows them out. Then against teams you're supposed to beat, like, let's say Las Vegas, they just somehow lose. And it's just been a theme for them forever. It's not going to be as easy as last year. Last year, the Ravens just cakewalked through their entire schedule and were blowing out teams by 40 points every other week. And that's just kind of what they did. But it's a different team this year. Every season is new. And I think, in my opinion, this Ravens team is going to be tested a lot more this year than they were last season.
Yeah. And you got that 8-week stretch after the Bills. You're right. I mean, Bengals through to the Chargers. I see a fair amount of wins, and there should be wins, but we know it doesn't go that way. But I definitely see some soft landing spots, hopefully, if you're a Ravens fan in there. And people are going to remind me that the Bills have just as hard of stretches. They do. They got the Ravens, then the road Texans, and then they got put on a 3-game road stretch with the Ravens, then into Houston, and then into New York. So probably their biggest AFC East competitor, one of the best AFC North teams, into the best AFC South team. It's not an ideal 3-game stretch here. The Bills absolutely had to have 3-0 going into this. There were some talks that maybe they're going to lose to the Dolphins. The Jags are not going to go 0-3. There's no way they're going to be in that death sentence. So they had to be 3-0 just because of this 3-game stretch. Loosens up a little bit for them, and then they hit another hard stretch late in the season for them as well. So we're in tune with how these first place schedules go. They're not fun. And you look against your division opponents, and they have soft landing spots all over their schedule. You look at the Jets schedule, and there's soft spots all over it. So it's just the way those first place teams have to stay first. They have to beat these first place teams, leading us into this game this week. Lastly here, I'll get you out of here, but tell me about the Ravens. We talked a lot about schedule. We talked a lot about the offense. One place I always can rely on is the Ravens defense, but at 10th DVOA, not crazy, right about average per -2%, which is playing 2% better than average defensive football. Tell me about what's going on there. DB issues, like what's happening. I've seen I was reading some stuff from your own guys, middle linebacker issues. I guess tell me about what's happening on that usually very solid, and they have played solid in stretches, but usually very solid Ravens defense that have some lapses right now as they approach the number 1 DVOA offense this week.
Yeah, it's essentially been a tale of 2 units where the run defense is exceptional. They lead the league in a lot of categories by a pretty wide margin, 2.8 yards per attempt given up for this team through 3 weeks. And part of that is the fact that, again, we talked about it, how Baltimore's gotten out to leads, and teams are just saying, well, now we have to abandon the run because in order to get back in this game, we have to throw the ball 80 million times to win, or at least try to win. So it is a bit of game flow, but at the same time, that's the reason why I actually don't grade run and pass defenses by total yards. I grade them by yards per attempt, because if a team throws the ball 100 times, you're going to have more total yards than a team that throws the ball 20 times. But in terms of how many yards you give up, it kind of averages all out. So when it comes to the pass defense, they're last in the league in yards given up total. They are tied for 26th in net yards per attempt. And it's kind of interesting because Marlon Humphrey actually has played really well to start this season for the Ravens. He was injured for a lot of the year last year and had a down year because of it, but he looks fully back into form. You have Kyle Hamilton, who struggled over the first couple weeks of the season, weeks 1 and 2, but he bounced back in a big way last week and had 12 total tackles in that game and was his old Kyle Hamilton self. But then you have players like Marcus Williams, who they signed to a big contract from the Saints a couple years ago, 5 years, $70 million, and he's struggled to say the least this season to start. He's that guy who they can trust in single high coverage, kind of that ball hawk type player, and he just hasn't really had a strong start to the year. Brandon Stevens, who played really well for them last season, he's had his moments this year, and then you have other players stepping up like Ardarius Washington and some others there as well. But then you do talk about the middle linebacker group, and Roquan Smith, by Roquan Smith standards, has struggled this year. And he looks heavier, out of shape. And in coverage, teams are feasting on that. So over the middle of the field, the Chiefs just spammed this action in week 1 where they put Rashee Rice in the slot, and Baltimore was mashing up linebackers with him. And the only player that could stop Rashee Rice was Trenton Simpson, who has played very well at the middle linebacker spot. But Roquan is kind of that guy that you need to have playing up to his standard because he's one of the heartbeats of this defense. And we know how important he is as just a vocal leader and someone who always is in the right spot at the right time. But he doesn't feel as athletic this year as he was last season. And maybe that's just him getting into shape over the course of the year, and he's going to drop down weight as the season goes on. But he's been a player that I think leaves a little to be desired based off of what the standard for him is, which obviously is just so high. His standards are so up there. So I think with this Ravens defensive front, it's been the story, because I think a lot of people expected the secondary to ball out and there'd be some questions on the defensive front. And so I go back to that run game, guys like Nnamdi Madubuike and Travis Jones, who's been awesome. Kyle Van Noy's having another great start to his season. And Afe Owe has stepped up. That's been the good part. But there has been some disconnect, and John Harbaugh mentioned this, some disconnects between the pass rush and the secondary in the fourth quarter. And we know how well those two have to mesh over the course of a game in order for you to win and have your defense play up to their potential. So they brought in Yannick Ngakoue to their practice squad. I don't expect him to play this week in Buffalo. I kind of expect that to be in a couple weeks down the line. But they clearly think they need more, despite that they're not, I think they're 8th or 9th in sacks this season. So, and they're towards the bottom in blitz percentage too, which obviously if you want to win, you don't blitz Josh Allen. I think that's one of the number one rules here is Josh Allen just carves up that blitz. Baltimore, I believe, has the 8th lowest blitz percentage in the league this season. They're not as aggressive as they have been in recent seasons. They don't want, just like Buffalo's defense, they don't want to get anything deep on them. So they will, in certain situations, play too high and make sure that doesn't happen. So they'll give you the stuff in the short and intermediate part of the field. If you take that, they try to tighten up in the red zone and hold you to 3 points or none. That's their deal, where they don't want to have a 30-yard completion bombed over their head or a 40-yard completion bombed over their head. They'll play single high stuff, and they'll rotate guys in. Eddie Jackson is who they brought in to replace Geno Stone. He's been fine this season. Actually hasn't been targeted once this year. But this defense as a whole has the talent, but part of it does come back to Zach Orr. And as a first-time play caller, you have tough tests against one of the greatest of all time in Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid to start. And then obviously I think that Raiders game was supposed to be a get-back game and was to an extent, but obviously they lost it. And then that Dallas game, the fourth quarter certainly had some lows, but the first 3, they were on fire. So just consistency is the key word with this team, especially on defense. And against Buffalo, if you're not consistent, they're going to make you pay for it.
Kevin, I'm glad you mentioned as much as you did, because when I was looking at the stats, I had to do a double take. I was like, wait, the Ravens defense is ranked number 1 against the rush, but 32nd against the pass. And I had to kind of look again to make sure that that was accurate. And I guess it is, because you just confirmed that. So if you're constructing the Bills game plan, I'm thinking if I'm Joe Brady, I'm going to try to do what I did last week against Jacksonville, because Josh Allen carved up that defense. I think this has to be another big Josh Allen game. Would you say that the Ravens are vulnerable because of how, well, first of all, because of how they're playing, but then also because of how Josh Allen's playing and how Joe Brady has been scheming these players open? Everything's starting to click for the Bills offense. So if you were constructing the Bills game plan, do you think that that's a way to get Baltimore this week? Kind of just do what you did last week, attack the middle of the field, attack those DBs? Because, I mean, James Cook's been really, really nice this year. And I think a lot of Bills fans love James Cook. Like there was a sign from Bills office that said everybody eats when James cooks. So he's becoming a fan favorite, and the Bills are using him well. But if they're number 1 against the run, I'm not going to try to hammer that down this week and say, James Cook, go out for 100 yards. I think you're going to put the ball in Josh Allen's hands Sunday Night Football and say, okay, can you beat Josh Allen?
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think if you can establish the run, I mean, that's obviously such a huge benefit, but I wouldn't necessarily bank on that in terms of this. Baltimore defense being as good as they have been. So if you can get Josh Allen on the move in this game and kind of scheme guys open in certain ways, and you can use guys like Dalton Kincaid in that role, or maybe, Curtis Samuel can finally get going and he can be kind of a guy you can use in a bunch of different roles or whatever it may be. This Buffalo team, I know that there was the whole, misconception of, okay, Stephon Diggs is gone now, and they have this kind of like, I know a lot of people called it like a ragtag team of receivers. Like, how is this going to go? And it's worked out really well for him because Allen's spreading the ball around, and it's not like a defense can key in on any one player. So if it's James Cook getting out into space, or you're using Kincaid, or Khalil Shakir is getting open and doing his thing, if you can get a deep shot or two on this Baltimore defense, they might have to send more attention there, but I wouldn't necessarily I'm not expecting Baltimore to do a lot of that in this game. I expect this to kind of be a both teams take what's given to them type deal, and whichever team converts more in the red zone probably wins the game. And if, you're able to hold your opposing offense to field goals, that's probably a good omen for you. But I think Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson have to be going to be the two that have to win this game for the Ravens. Or Ravens and Bills, where for Josh Allen, against this Baltimore defense, they've been getting to the quarterback Baltimore has in a hurry. So with Allen being able to step up in the pocket and seeing a guy streaking across the middle of the field, take that option. If you see green grass in front of you, you take that. That's the stuff that Baltimore's defense is going to let you take. And then they're confident enough in their defense inside the 20 to say, hey, you know what? Take that all day. We're going to stop you here and not let you score a touchdown. So I think touchdowns are the name of the game here. But I do think getting James Cook, getting Dalton Kincaid active early, I'm interested to see how the Ravens match up Kyle Hamilton. I'm sure Kincaid and Hamilton are going to have a lot of matchups, not a lot of snaps against each other. I'm looking forward to that. But it's going to be a matter of, can the Ravens defense get off the field effectively and make sure that they're consistent in all phases? But if Baltimore can limit Buffalo's run game and you're eliminating an aspect of an opposing offense, that makes it easier for every defensive player because you don't have to worry about one certain aspect.
One last thing I'll say is there was a crazy stat that came out after Monday night's game that Khalil Shakir tied Michael Thomas for the longest record since 1991 for a wide receiver with consecutive catches. So he has 27 straight targets without a drop. And that's just really crazy to think about. He's just automatic. He's so consistent. And if you're saying that Roquan Smith has been underwhelming this year and the middle of the defense is kind of, the area that you can attack, I still want to respect your DBs. You said Marlon Humphrey's been playing well, and you guys have some bigger names on that back end. I'm almost thinking that this could be a big Khalil Shakir week. Maybe attack the middle of the field against Roquan Smith. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the middle of the field for both these teams is going to be so key here, especially because if you do that, it opens up other things, and defenses have to be more aware of what you're doing over the middle of the field, and you have to send more attention over there. And also play action. The play action game is going to be big. Obviously, the run game has to be a threat in order for that to work the most effectively. If you're running the ball for 1 yard every play, defense is going to be like, okay, come on, you're really going to run the ball right now. But if you're running the ball effectively, or at least picking up some level of chunk gains, that play action game works perfectly. And Buffalo and Baltimore both have personnel that can make that work to perfection. So yeah, look, I'm a big Khalil Shakir guy. I loved him coming out of the draft a couple of years ago. And in my opinion, he's a guy that Baltimore has to look out for. And again, you have a bunch of Buffalo receivers that, might not be the Stephon Diggs bright star that Buffalo's been used to over the last couple of the seasons. But look, they're effective in their roles, and that can be just as dangerous.
Yeah, Ken. Yeah, to Kevin's point, 26 straight, not dropped, targets. So every target he has, he has received the ball. So there hasn't even been a pass breakup, or a drop, or any type of bad miscommunication. So that is, I guess, the matchup that most people aren't aware of. I'm sure defensive coordinators are pretty in tune now with that. And then to your point, I think these are two, and maybe Mahomes. There's 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks that can make things happen, even if the running game is getting like. Look, even Sean McDermott said it today. I could have the best defense called. I know where Lamar is. We have him in a run fit, and he can make me miss. And Josh Allen is very similar. I think there's two quarterbacks that even if they're not going to hand it off for 1 yard, that play action still works. And Derrick Henry's always going to be a threat. And James Cook is now elevating himself to that level of, if you're into too high, the Bills will run. Like Joe Brady will prove it to you. If you're going to drop into too high, Josh Allen has zero problems taking 4 to 5 yards, and that's the development of Allen as compared to years past, where he's been Superman and he's get the labels and he gets Sugar High Josh and he gets those labels. He will now take the 4-yard run, 5-yard run every single time till someone comes out of it. And then that's where, Jacksonville decided to go man coverage the entire game. That's even worse than blitzing. It just maybe with elite DBs, Jacksonville doesn't have them. Not many teams do. That can run man, and I don't think you can run man. Even the Jets, if they were to run man, they can't run man against Josh Allen. The Patriots tried it with some strong DBs. It didn't work under Belichick either, post Brady. So with all that being said, I mean, I think you gave us a really good recap of what's going on. And then, you mentioned the sacks. Bills 11 total sacks. Ravens right there at 10 total sacks. So they're both top 10 in the league in total sacks. But defensive fronts are being effective. So I think that'll play a role. I think the under might hit in this game. It's a crazy prediction for an offense that's 1-2 DVOA. But I have this feeling that you're right, that they're going to play some sound red zone. I think they're going to move the ball fairly easily both ways. I think whoever has the red zone defense, and that's where McDermott flourishes. However, the Bills do have linebacker issues straight up. They're playing Dorian Williams, who's great against the run. He's been awesome against the run, is a liability in coverage, period. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. And Balen Spector has shown kind of the reverse, struggles a little bit against the run, but is a good coverage guy. Never healthy, but he is right now. So it is a solid linebacker. It's not great. So there's definitely some wins there for the Ravens as well in the middle of the field. And the Bills DBs more than make up for with how well Christian Benford is. He's playing solid cover or corner football right now. He's limiting the most separation in the league right now. There's a corner for everybody to get familiar with. And I did check the pass rush win rates for the Ravens, and they've been very solid across the board on the win rates front. It looks like they're winning at about a close to 45% win rate. Pretty solid. So the Bills have to be aware of what the Ravens are able to do on the win rate front. So that we'll see what O-line shows up. That's another piece of this. Like you said, if you're in the backfield all day, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
It gets long quickly for a team. So that's going to be interesting, but we really appreciate you giving us 45 minutes. Big game for the Ravens, big game for the Bills. They're at home Sunday Night Football. There's a reason you put Jackson and Allen on Sunday Night Football. This is the reason, just like you saw Mahomes and Jackson. Still think it's the trio at this point until Burrow has proven he can take them out. But I just think right now in the way that it's constructed, I still have some hopes that these could be the 3 high teams. And this is why we're going to see a Sunday Night Football and maybe some form of preview of the playoffs if both teams go right. And we'll get you on again in January because I think there's a likelihood this isn't the first matchup for these teams. Give us what you think is going to happen in this one. It's in Baltimore, 1-2. The Bills can go to 4-0 to really solidify themselves in the AFC and really put a damper in the Ravens, or vice versa. Going to 2-2 is probably pretty big as the Ravens get into quote unquote a little bit of softer landing spot.
Yeah, it's just, man, the Ravens need this game so badly. I mean, we obviously know all the stats about the 0-3 teams, but 1-3, I mean, that's another hole you just don't want to fall into, especially when you got to go to Cincinnati. Despite what the Bengals have been this season, that's a divisional game, and those can always get a little funky. So, man, I mean, Baltimore's 20-3 under John Harbaugh in home primetime games over the course of Harbaugh's tenure. So, they're hoping to improve that record, and they get up for these type of games. Obviously, Buffalo does too, and I agree with you where this could very easily be an AFC Championship preview or some form of it, and we could be talking again in January like that. But for this game, I'm going to go Ravens win by a point, and I'm going to go Justin Tucker gets his redemption again. He's been struggling to start the year. Again, the worst kicker in the league statistically so far, which is just crazy that's even come out of my mouth. It's just unbelievable. But I'm going to say it's going to be a battle between which team even just has the ball last and is able to drive down the field. We know that Josh Allen can do it. We know Lamar Jackson can do it. So I'm going to say whoever has the ball last wins this game, but I'll say it's the Ravens who have it last, and I'll go 27-26.
And injuries, do you expect the O-lineman, lastly, the O-lineman to play? Michael Pierce on the injury report, Armour Davis.
Yeah.
What's your final update there in your opinion?
I assume, and again, I think Thursday's injury report will tell us more, but I'd assume that all of them play. Maybe if I'd have to give one guy that I think is the least likely, Jalen Armour Davis left the game on Sunday with his hamstring. So that's something that forced him from that game, where the others, they were able to all finish the game. So I'd probably go, if any of those guys have the least likely shot to play, I'll say Jalen Armour Davis, and then I'll just assume the rest of the guys play for now.
Does he fill in as your nickel? Where do you see him? When does he come in a DB, like high heavy dime situation? When do you see Armour Davis?
He's an outside guy. So they got Nate Wiggins back last week, who definitely had some welcome to the NFL moments. Also had one of the biggest plays of the game, so kind of a mixed bag for him. But their nickel guy right now with Arthur Millette out is Ardarius Washington, but they will also move Marlon Humphrey in there at times. They'll move Kyle Hamilton in there at times. So definitely a committee with a bunch of solid players, but they love to move guys all around this defense. So you never really know where everybody's going to play right at the start of the game.
Got it. Yeah, it makes sense. The Bills do the same with Jamarcus Ingram and Cam Lewis. So you'll see them as well in a similar fashion. But Kevin, thank you so much for giving us your time, and appreciate all your work you're doing over there. I follow you. I love watching your stuff, even when it has nothing to do with the Bills. And good luck to the Orioles, who took it to my Yankees again here tonight. But the Yankees are kind of just going through the motions right now. So we'll see them in the playoffs as well. But appreciate you, man, for popping on, and good luck to the Ravens. And hopefully we'll see you in late January. Yeah,
100%, guys. Appreciate you having me. Good luck on Sunday, and enjoy the game.
Yeah, see you later, man. I appreciate your time. That's Kevin, one of our favorite friends. Guest of the show, comes on whenever the Bills play the Ravens, Kevin. But we're wrapping up in the 10 o'clock hour. We got a lot of great information. Kevin, give us your takes on that before we get into score predictions.
Yeah, I want to talk about the game plan real quick. So if we could construct it a little bit more than what we did with Kevin, I think that this is going to be another big Josh Allen game, because I didn't even realize until just a little bit ago that the Ravens are dead last against the pass, but they're first against the rush. So they have the 23rd ranked defense in total, and they're in the bottom half of scoring as well. And if you look at the Bills, who are the first team in scoring, they're averaging over 37 points per game now. I think this is a game where if you can replicate what you did last week against Jacksonville, make Lamar have to throw on you. Because Sean McDermott has had a lot of success with Lamar Jackson in the past. The Bills haven't had as much success defending Derrick Henry. So you don't want the Ravens to dictate this game and have Derrick Henry run all over you. So if your offense can click, make Lamar Jackson have to make those tight window throws. And I think that that's when the Bills play their best, and they start to get that momentum, and they can kind of feed off of each other. And like Sean McDermott says, complementary football. So I think that's my game plan right there. Have Josh Allen air it out, spread the offense out, get everyone involved. And I think that if you can do that, that'll make things a lot easier for the defense.
There you have it. I think that ultimately, I don't think that, even though we want to use a similar game plan to the Jags, they don't play as much man. They have better DBs. It's a better team all around. Ultimately, I know they have some struggles with Roquan Smith right now, but their defense is getting to the quarterback at a better rate. Their DBs are stronger. If anything, like, you're going to see some lapses offensively from the Ravens. I just think Derrick Henry's better than what Travis Etienne. Ultimately, it all comes down to that offensive line for the Ravens. If it comes in healthy, they'll have a good shot to move the ball. If it's more banged up than Kevin was thinking, I think it could be a longer day for the run, therefore a longer day for Lamar. So I think that the offense is going to be constructed as such to take what they give them. Don't force anything. Don't think you're Superman. Continue to do what you do. Too high, run the ball if you need to. I just don't think that Harbaugh is going to give you a Josh Allen man coverage day. He's going to make you beat him with short passes. He's going to make you beat him with running the ball in too high. Like, that's what it's going to come down to. So Josh obviously has been successful at that, but it's a lot different than when you blitz or play man against Josh, where he plays at an elite level. His too high numbers are still average. They're about, I think he has 28 interceptions and 28 touchdowns when a team just drops into too high. I just don't know how every team doesn't utilize that method. Teams do, they do try it, but you need to have the right personnel. The Ravens do have the right personnel, but they are struggling against the pass right now. So we'll see if they get right or if they're going to struggle again, because Dak Prescott took care of them, especially late in that game.
Yeah, and, to your point about their DBs, that's what I was telling Kevin. Like, I still want to respect that, because listen to some of these names here. Nate Wiggins, Marcus Williams, Kyle Hamilton, Brandon Stevens, Marlon Humphrey. They drafted TJ Tampa. They signed Eddie Jackson. So, they still have some dogs on that back end. But to Kevin's point, the middle of their defense has been a little bit weaker, with Roquan Smith not playing up to his level. They have Kyle Van Noy, who, Josh Allen has a history of trucking over, at least at one time. He's getting up there in age. So I think they're susceptible to the middle of the field there. And that's why I think that maybe you don't want to completely air it out with Allen. But I think, like I said earlier, if they can continue to spread the field horizontally, that'll lead to more prosperous gains vertically. So I think if you want to live in the middle of the field in the flats, because let's not forget the tight ends of the running backs here, Josh Allen has been connecting with those guys between Kincaid, Knox, James Cook, Ray Davis, now even Ty Johnson. I think that is the key to the game right there.
You contain them with your DNs. You don't contain them with linebackers. If you spot, I mean, Lamar can make almost any linebacker miss. Maybe Matt, not the top of the top. But majority of linebackers aren't going to be able to contain Lamar Jackson. So you contain him with the ends, big in the body, in the pocket. You keep him in the pocket. You play DN contain. You pass rush up the middle. I mean, it's a pretty solid game plan with what you tried. It doesn't mean you can. It's what you try to do. You get that interior pressure with that Oliver, Daquan Jones. And you contain him more with like AJ Epinesa is built for this kind of game. It's an AJ Epinesa style of game more than is up the field like Von Miller. So it might be AJ Epinesa. What you can do with Smoot might be important in this one, and Rousseau. So I don't know where Von fits into this specific game plan, but you may have him in more of a DN contain role to make sure that he is setting the edge and you're keeping him in the pocket. And you're going to give up some DN pass rush. You're going to need pass rush from blitzing. You're going to need pass rush up the middle. So you're going to use that more than a Dorian Williams style contained. But Kevin, it's time for score predictions. What do you think is going to happen? We have a 1-point loss based on what Kevin gave us. What are you thinking? And bring us home with your score prediction.
I'm going to go Bills 30-17. I just think that this team is clicking right now, and I know that the Ravens are kind of in desperation mode, but we said that about the Jaguars, and look what happened. The Bills just completely walked all over them. So I don't think that the Bills are going to completely dominate again. Like, I think it will be close, but the Bills will pull away. And I think that McDermott is going to come up with a great plan to contain Lamar Jackson. And again, like I said, as long as you can get up on them offensively, that'll make things easier for you defensively, because it's not going to be a Derrick Henry game. You are forcing Lamar Jackson to have to throw on you. And I think that will bode well for the Bills. So I have the Bills winning 30-17 to improve to 4-0, setting up a showdown in Houston the following week.
I agree. I got the Bills 24-20. That's a number that's jumped out to me. I ultimately think there's going to be some points, but there's going to see some frustrating moments on offense for both sides of the ball. Both teams, 24-20 is what I have in this game. I think the Bills ultimately do enough. Josh Allen controls the ball for long enough. I do agree that the Ravens will go on a run, though. I ultimately do believe. I have a little bit more hope in them than being the 5th seed. But I do think they go and take that division from the Steelers toward the end of the year. The Steelers kind of remind me of a team that can get it done. But they always do kind of fall short now underneath this new regime in terms of winning in the playoffs or winning late in the season. They do make the playoffs occasionally. They do have a good defense. I just don't know how much I buy that offense right now. And I think that the Ravens will come through and win a bunch of games in a row in the middle of the year once they figure out some of the lapses across their O-line as well as some of the DB things. So that's it. We really appreciate everybody tuning in for us here today. We appreciate Kevin from coming on from Locked On Ravens. Really great guest, as always. Maybe we see him in January, whether they're the 6th seed, 7th seed, 5 seed. The Bills can match up with them in the wild card round. They can match up with them in the division round, all the way to the AFC Championship game. So I think there is a likelihood that the Bills could see them again. It is a likely contender. So if you don't think they win the division, or the 4 or 5 or 5 or 6 seed, the Bills could very well see them in the first round of the playoffs. For sure, if the Ravens are in fact a wild card team. But I'm Kevin, to our show sponsors, the Summit Center and Dave Dengler and Larson-Timko Funeral Home. We really appreciate everybody coming out here today to talk. We'll have a lot to recap next week on the show. We'll have a Houston guest. We'll have Houston coming up. And there's just a ton. Maybe the Bills will get some 1 or 2 reinforcements back based on how this game goes. Taron Johnson would have been perfect for this game. But from Kevin, that's Kevin. We really appreciate everybody giving us 90 minutes of their time here tonight. And we'll check you guys here next Wednesday night to talk about this game, as well as what Stephon Diggs and the Houston Texans look like. We'll see you then.